Good morning, everybody. We're live here from the birdhouse, and today we're talking about woodpeckers. We are talking about their characteristics, how you can attract them to your yard, and the different species that you can find, at least here in New York and all along the East Coast. As always, we love to know what kind of things you are seeing. You can put your sightings in the comments. If you have any questions, you can throw those in there too, or you can just say hi. We always love to know who is on. So let's get started. We had a question on Saturday's broadcast about how to tell the difference between male and female. I believe it was a red-bellied woodpecker. And so that's kind of what spurred the woodpecker conversation. And woodpeckers are always fun to talk about. So, of course, if you have any questions, absolutely throw them in the comments. So don't be shy there. As far as woodpeckers go, in general, no matter where you are from, woodpeckers will live in woodlands or in forests, as their name kind of suggests. They forage for insects on trees and in branches. So you can often see them climbing up trees as they're looking for different insects or insect eggs or larvae, anything like that. They do communicate by drumming. So sometimes if you hear a woodpecker making a lot of noise, not only on the side of a tree, but could be making noise on the side of your house, on a mailbox, on a satellite dish if you happen to have one, that's what's called drumming. So sometimes they're making a lot of noise in on a tree in order to, pound in there and get some of the insect larvae or insects. But sometimes they're doing it to communicate, to show to females that they are around and looking for a mate, or to say to other males that this is their territory and to go somewhere else. So they make some really, really loud noises, especially in the spring. So right now they're not doing so much drumming. You might hear it in the middle of the woods if you're going out hiking. You might hear some sounds kind of reverberating through the woods of those woodpeckers drumming, but it really gets even more intense as we get into spring. So come March, April, you'll start hearing more of that drumming. They also will nest and roost in the cavities they create. So often you can see woodpeckers pecking at the side of a tree as they do, but sometimes they will make nice big cavities that they can nest inside. So they will make use of some of those holes. Sometimes they are just making small holes in the trees to feed. Other times, if they're excavating a large cavity, they're probably using it to nest. Woodpeckers have interesting characteristics too. They're constantly bashing their heads against the side of trees and hard things. And so why don't they get headaches? Well, they do have a specialized bill and tongue to help with some of that. They have a very hard reinforced skull. They also have a tongue that actually pads their skull as well, that pads their brain. So if you look at this picture here, you can see this is a woodpecker. The pink there is the tongue of the woodpecker. And when their tongue is retracted, so when it's inside their head or their skull, it actually wraps all the way around the base of their skull up over the top of their head. And you can see that a bit in this picture here of just the skull from the top view of the skull there, that it does give them a little bit of padding. And so while they're pecking on the side of the tree, their tongue is retracted. So they're pecking away, and that tongue on the top of their brain gives them just some little extra padding there as well. And because their tongues go that far back up into, way up into their skull, they have really, really, really long tongues. And you can see a picture here on the right of a pileated woodpecker with its tongue sticking out. Just kind of a rare photo to get, but they do have really, really long tongues. So when they're pecking away at the trees, they can easily pick off those insects with their specialized tongues, which actually have little barbs on them too to help grab little insects. So this is just another photo of that. They're showing the tongue of the woodpecker wrapped all the way around the back of their skull. So really, really, really cool. They do have specialized skulls in order for them to not hurt themselves when they are pecking. They also have specialized feet. If you think of most birds' feet, and if you ever see bird tracks in the snow or anything like that, they usually have 3 toes that are in front and then 1 toe that is in the back. Woodpeckers' feet are totally different. They have something what's called zygodactylous feet. I should have spelled it out here, but what that means is that they have two toes that are pointing forward and two toes that are pointing backwards. And you can see that a bit in this photo here where the woodpecker has two toes that are up front and two that are in the back. So they do have specialized feet that allow them to cling on just about any surface. They can cling upside down. They can cling easily to the side of the trees because of those specialized feet. So this is why they can use things like those upside down suet feeders and other birds like sparrows and starlings that have that kind of what we would maybe consider more of a normalized bird foot structure have a hard time doing that. So they also have these specialized feet that allow them to easily cling onto any surface. And you'll see that if you watch woodpeckers at all, when they fly into land on the side of a tree, they don't struggle with it at all. They just go right onto it, and they just are easily able to just cling right onto the side of the tree. They don't struggle. They don't kind of flap around. They can easily cling to it because of those specialized feet. As far as the different types of woodpeckers we have here, at least here in upstate New York, western New York, these are some of the common woodpeckers you'll find all over the East Coast. So even if you're not in New York, you can still identify these guys pretty easily. This is the downy woodpecker. This is probably the most common bird you'll have in your backyard, or if you're out hiking, you probably see a lot of downy woodpecker or hear them. They have little pick calls, which are kind of a high-pitched little sound that they'll make. And they're about the size of a suet cake. So if you're trying to identify what kind of woodpecker you have in front of you, if it's fairly small, it's probably going to be a downy woodpecker. If it's at your suet feeder and it's just about the exact same size as a suet cake, it's definitely a downy woodpecker. They also have a very small bill. A lot of woodpeckers have kind of a larger, more robust bills, but if you look at the bill or the beak of this downy woodpecker, it's pretty small. So it's pretty short as far as woodpeckers go. They are black and white, but with the males of the downy woodpecker, they have red on the back of their head as well. So that's how you can tell the difference between male and female. So as far as differentiating the woodpeckers I'm going to show you today, the ones that have more red on them are always going to be the males. It's just where to find that more red varies between the different species. So this is your downy woodpecker. The male is there on the left. You can kind of see its specialized feet there too, actually. You can see the two little toes. Might be hard because it blends in so well with the bark, but those two little toes pointing up forward, and then there's two little toes pointing backwards. Making it easy for them to cling onto the side of trees. So we got the male on the left, and then there's the female. They're here all year round, and if you have any kind of suet out or peanuts out, you are very likely to get a downy woodpecker hanging out. All of these woodpeckers are also cavity nesters. So this is an example of a downy woodpecker nest. So this is a hole that they have excavated from a tree. There's a picture of a little downy woodpecker poking its head out. And they don't build a nest. So they don't build a nest like other songbirds do. You're not going to see them bringing nesting materials to their nesting site. If anything, you'll see them removing wood chips, because when they're excavating these sites, there's all these wood chips that just kind of land inside. So sometimes you'll see them with a bill full of wood chips that they'll just throw out onto the ground. So that's a good way to look for nesting woodpeckers as well as we get into the spring. If you're walking around in the woods and you see just kind of a whole bunch of wood chips laying on the side of the path or just randomly in the woods, take a look up and see there might be some kind of hole there that the woodpecker has excavated. So that's a good way to look for their nesting sites. And so they don't build a nest, so they will just literally lay their eggs inside that hole, inside that crevice. So if you get a downy woodpecker house, or any kind of woodpecker house for that matter, they all come with some kind of wood chips. And the reason for that is you want to sprinkle those wood chips on the base of on the inside of the house. And that's where they'll lay their eggs, kind of like owls. Owls don't build a nest either. They just kind of lay their eggs right in their nest, or in the nest that they've taken over, or in the hollow cavity. So they just lay their eggs there and they're good to go. So this is an example of a downy woodpecker nesting site. And then there's the hairy woodpecker, which looks very similar to the downy woodpecker, but it's larger. So on the left, you can see the difference between the downy and the hairy woodpecker. The downy is on the left. You can see it's quite small and it has that little beak. That's probably the biggest differentiating character. If you can't tell size-wise, sometimes it's hard to tell the size of the bird if you only are seeing one of them to tell if it's a downy or a hairy. But the beak is what will really dictate to you what it is. You can see just how much bigger that beak is on the hairy woodpecker than it is on the downy woodpecker. And just like the downies, the males have red on the back of their head and the females don't. So on the left, this picture is of a female downy woodpecker and a female hairy woodpecker. And then on the right, that is a male hairy woodpecker. There are also red-bellied woodpeckers, another really common bird. You can hear them calling in the woods quite often. And they will nest in hollow trees. They'll nest in birdhouses as long as the hole is big enough for them to fit inside. And here's an example of looks like a red-bellied woodpecker that's excavating a nest. So they have a bill full of wood chips that they're going to just throw out onto the ground so they can have room to lay their eggs. But just like the other woodpeckers I mentioned, the male will have more red on its head than the female. So on the left-hand side here, where there's a picture of both the male and female, the male is on the left there and the female is on the right. So you can see the female almost has a little bald patch, if you will. It's a patch on the top of her head that's lacking that red. It's very gray in color. Now, that being said, juveniles won't have any red at first when they're first coming out of the nest, but you won't see them until much later in the season. So if you're seeing something right now that's lacking some red on the top of its head, it's going to be the female red-bellied woodpecker. So then there's the red-headed woodpecker, and they are the ones that you can't tell the difference between male and female. They look the same, but the red-headed woodpecker is quite rare because they are in a very big population decline right now. And it's through surveys and things like that, it's been determined that the red-headed woodpeckers have declined by over 2% per year from 1966 to 2014. And this is data that's almost 10 years old now. So it'll be interesting to see with our New York State Breeding Bird Atlas going on right now, which we're in our 5th year of it, to see what the populations locally of red-headed woodpeckers are going to be like. But with that 2% decline year over year, it's resulted in a cumulative decline of 70% since 1966. So these used to be one of the most common woodpeckers in backyards, but not anymore. So they are in a huge decline. They can be somewhat nomadic. You can see them in one location year over year, and then they can be absent the following years. So they can be kind of nomadic. Locally, if you're in the Rochester area, a good place to look for the red-headed woodpeckers are in and around the lakeshore. So different parks that are around the lake are really good places to look for them. So out in Webster, Webster Park is a really good place. All along the lake, out at Braddock's Bay, they have them. Sometimes they have them at Turning Point Park. So there's several different places, and you can always check eBird to see what is the most recent data. So as far as plumages go, or the different feather variations, the male and female will look the same, but the juveniles, this picture here of this kind of grayish bird, that's a juvenile. So they don't have their bright coloration yet. And sometimes their heads will be kind of like a rusty, kind of like brownish, orangish color, while they're juveniles also. So the juveniles will look quite different from the adults. And then there's the northern flicker, which are more common in backyards coming to feeders in the winter months. So you might be seeing them right now. On the East Coast here, we have what's called the yellow shafted northern flicker. So there's an eastern population that has this yellow wash on the underside of their feathers. And then if you were to go out west, it's a very reddish, orangish wash underneath their feathers. It's the same species, but just some variations with East Coast and West Coast populations. They are here all year round, another cavity nesting bird. And you can tell the difference between male and female because just like the other woodpeckers, the males will have more red on their face here where it looks like they almost have a little mustache. The black mustache is the female, and if it's red, it's a male. So that's how you can tell the difference. And normally you see them on the ground and they're flicking around leaves and things like that looking for food. But you can also, of course, see them clinging onto the side of trees and going up and down trees also. But that is the northern flicker. And then here's, here's the picture on the right here shows the yellow washed feathers. It's called the yellow shafted northern flicker. And then this is the red shafted northern flicker. So you can see not only is it a male because it's got those red stripes on its face and not the black like the female, but this is what it looks like on the West Coast. So that's the red shafted. And then there's the pileated woodpecker, which is the largest woodpecker in North America. And some of you are lucky enough to get them at your bird feeders, which is really fun. If you've got one making a nest site in a tree nearby, you'll know it because they make really, really large rectangular holes like this picture here on the left. Most woodpeckers make fairly small circular sized holes compared to the pileated woodpecker, which makes really large rectangular holes in trees. And just like the northern flicker, that spot that almost looks like a mustache on the face of the female is black. And so this is a female on the left. And you'll also see that her crest, where it's red on the top, there's a little blank patch of black between her beak, where her beak starts, and that red patch. And the male doesn't have that. So the male has more red. It's completely red from its crest all the way to the tip of the bill. And it also has a red mustache. So that is how you tell the difference between male and female pileated woodpeckers. And in the spring, you might be lucky enough to see the young like this poking their heads out of the trees. They're pretty loud, actually. So if you think you might know where a nesting site is, and once those young are large enough and big enough, they'll start sticking their head out of the nesting cavity like this and squawking to the parents, which is pretty fun. So this is the pileated woodpecker. Oh, and here's a video of one. This is not excavating a nest, but this is looking for insects, and you can see just how they can decimate a tree very, very quickly. So they can do a lot of damage real quick. So if you see a woodpecker doing this, odds are you've got some kind of an insect infestation in your tree. So if the woodpecker doesn't take it down, the insects will over time. So that is the reason why they really, really destroy trees like this. Usually they'll make a little hole in it to do their thing, but if they're doing something like this, there's usually a big insect infestation. And then there's the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and this is our migratory species. So they tend to be here more in the spring and summer. That being said, a couple of years ago, we had a lot of people spotting them in the winter, especially it's been pretty mild here as far as winters go. So you wouldn't be completely shocked if you had a yellow-bellied sapsucker hanging around. These guys don't really come to feeders so much, especially the suet feeders, but they'll come to hummingbird feeders actually sometimes because like their name suggests, they not only eat insects, but they'll also drink sap from trees. So I've got their map here too that shows the blue is where they spend their time in the winter. The yellow is during migration where they'll pass through, and then the orange is their breeding territory. So that's where they'll spend their spring and summer. And so we're in the orange, but this is one that seems to be more tolerant of the winters. So I wouldn't be completely surprised if you had a yellow-bellied sapsucker this time of the year, but really they're going to be more common starting in like March, April. And like the other woodpeckers, the males have more red on them. The female is on the left here, and the male is on the right. And the male has a red patch on its throat that the female doesn't have. So that is the yellow-bellied sapsucker. You can tell very easily if you've had a yellow-bellied sapsucker around, because they don't make the large holes in trees. They'll make a whole bunch of small little ones in straight or straight-ish lines. So these pictures here show what yellow-bellied sapsuckers will do to trees. So they will make straight lines of little holes like this. And the reason for that is they'll drill little holes and the sap will continue to run through the tree. They can drink the sap. Sap will also attract insects, which they can pick off of these little holes as well. So if you've got something like this in your tree, a yellow-bellied sapsucker has been there at some point. As far as attracting woodpeckers to your backyard, there's really nothing better than putting out a suet feeder, especially a paddle-tail suet feeder, which are these in the picture. If you've ever had a suet feeder before and it's just a little cage, I don't know if my camera is going to pick this up, little cage like this, that's fine, and that's good for the little guys like the downy woodpeckers and everything. But if you want to get the larger woodpeckers like the pileated woodpecker or the red-bellied woodpecker, really a paddle-tail suet feeder is the best way to go. And you can see why with these pictures. The woodpeckers will use that paddle to prop their tail up so they can cling onto the suet feeder with those specialized feet, and they'll use that paddle to elevate themselves, to keep themselves so they're upright, so they're not flopping all around on the feeder. And that just allows them to feed a little bit more easily on the bird feeder. As far as suet feeders go, there are squirrel-proof ones also. If you're having squirrel issues, there's also hot pepper suet, which squirrels don't like. They can taste the hot pepper, but birds don't have as many taste buds, so they don't taste it. So that's one way you can keep squirrels off, but still get a good amount of woodpeckers at your feeders. And then this is the upside down suet feeder, and this is a contraption to help keep out things like sparrows and starlings. If you've got birds that are not woodpeckers that are raiding your suet feeders, you can try something like this. And because they have those specialized feet, they can easily cling upside down to feed from it. So not only can woodpeckers do this, but nuthatches are also good at clinging upside down, and so are chickadees. So you can get those, what are sometimes grouped together as the clinging birds, coming to your upside down suet feeder, but other birds will not bother it. And then there's peanuts. Woodpeckers definitely love peanuts. You can give them the peanut pieces, which we call peanut pickouts. So that's the inside of the peanuts that's in this feeder on the left here. And you can see there's no perches on it. The woodpeckers don't need those perches. They'll just cling onto the side of it and peck away at the peanut pieces and pull out what they need. And then you can also do peanuts in the shell. And here's a downy woodpecker loving its peanuts in the shell. Blue jays love peanuts in the shell, but you'll also get woodpeckers coming to them too. Anytime I put my peanuts out, within minutes, I've got a red-bellied woodpecker there going to town. So they absolutely love peanuts as well. And mealworms, especially during nesting season. Once those eggs have hatched, those nestlings need a lot of protein, which comes in the form of insect protein. So putting out mealworms, we talk about it all the time to attract bluebirds, but it will also attract the woodpeckers and other species as well that need that insect protein, which is most of the birds that are in your backyard will eat this kind of a thing, especially come breeding season when they are starting to mate. And then once those eggs have hatched and we're in real nestling season, that's when you'll really see the activity go up. And they'll eat live mealworms. That's the preferred food, but then they'll also eat freeze-dried mealworms, which are an option that we have year-round. So we have live mealworms when it starts to warm up a little bit, when they won't die from the cold if you put them outside, but you can put freeze-dried mealworms out all year round. And even nectar and fruit. So that yellow-bellied sapsucker I mentioned, they'll sometimes come to the hummingbird feeders, but then sometimes you get other birds coming to them too. We hear about flickers and red-bellied woodpeckers coming to oranges during oriole season. Sometimes there's one that'll feed from a hummingbird feeder. You just never know. Sometimes they'll eat the jelly from the Oriole feeders. So it's not super common, but it also happens here and there. You might get a rogue woodpecker that really likes jelly or likes the nectar. And then there's houses. So they will make their own nesting sites if they can, but you can also give them a little encouragement with something like a woodpecker house. These are bigger than your traditional bluebird house, for example. They're a lot longer and deeper, so they have a deeper nesting cavity. The holes are usually bigger, especially for the larger woodpeckers like the red-bellied woodpecker or the flicker. So you can give them a little bit of help with a woodpecker house. And those all come, like I mentioned earlier, with wood chips that you can just sprinkle on the floor of the house. And that gives them some encouragement to lay their eggs in there. Dead trees are another thing that you can keep up if it's safe. Because they will use those to excavate the holes. They'll use them as a source of food because dead trees are full of insects and insect eggs and insect larvae. So they'll eat from them, they'll nest in them. So if they can be left out safely, that's a really great source for woodpeckers to nest in. If you can't leave the dead tree up, you can always leave parts of it up. You can leave part of it up, or you can keep sections of it in your yard, like dead logs, pieces of the log in your yard, and the woodpeckers will feed from that. So that's another thing you can do to help encourage them in your yard. So that's everything I have about woodpeckers. If you have any comments, you can comments or questions, throw those in the comments. And of course, as always, we love to know what kind of things you're seeing. So you can put your sightings in there as well if you have any. Looks like Benny is on. He says, can I send a photo in the comments? I am not totally sure if you can, but you can definitely send a photo to us via Facebook, or you can email it to us. And let me see if I've got, yeah, this is our email address right here. It's info@thebirdhouseny.com. So you can absolutely send your photos in that way. And then we have people who send them in via Facebook or even via Instagram. On our Instagram, and our handle is the Birdhouse NY on both Instagram and Facebook. So you can send your photos that way. I don't know if you can, I don't think you can put them in the comments. I don't think there's a way to do that. But if you send photos in, we are happy to take them and happy to share them. Ed is on and says, many of the resident woodpeckers in our neighborhood love to peck the cedar siding on our house, but we've had success in discouraging them by hanging holographic reflective tape in many areas they like. The flapping tape seems to work. Yes. So as we get into breeding season more and they start doing that drumming characteristic, or that drumming behavior, I guess I should say, more and more, it can be very frustrating, especially if it's on the side of your house and you're trying to sleep, because it tends to be early in the morning. But there are different things you can do to keep them from doing that. And it sounds like Ed has had good luck with the reflective tape. We sell something called scare tape. It's holographic tape. You cut it in strips and then you hang it in the area, and they don't like that shininess of the holographic tape, and they tend to go elsewhere. So that's one thing you can do. We also have a spray that it's all natural, but it's like a grape, like a bitter grape type thing, and it's an irritant to them. They don't like that. So we've got a spray, like a concentrate that you can spray on the side of your house or wherever they're pecking, so that we do have things to help keep them at bay also. Stephanie is on. She says, we enjoy lots of woodpeckers in our yard, including nesting red-bellied woodpeckers in our ailing maple tree. Yeah, so it sounds like they're taking advantage of a tree that's not doing so well. So Stephanie's got some red-bellieds, it sounds like, nesting. And she says, my smaller woodpeckers enjoy my finch feeders too. Finch favorite. Yes, we hear about that here and there, that downy woodpeckers will sometimes come to Niger feeders, especially if they have not just Niger seed in them, but the ground up sunflower hearts, which is in the finch favorite, which it sounds like Stephanie's having good luck with. Yeah, I've had that too. Downy woodpeckers feeding from my finch favorite and my finch feeder, and sometimes red-breasted nuthatches too, when I happen to be lucky enough to get some of them around. It looks like that's everybody's comments and questions for the day. Yeah, Benny, if you've got photos, definitely send them in because we will share them. next time on our next broadcast here. And that includes all of you guys. If you have photos, send them into info@thebirdhouseny.com, or if you're watching via Facebook, super simple to just send them in that way. Send them into our Facebook page or to our Instagram page is pretty easily as well. So if you have any questions, you can always give us a call or shoot us an email too, and we're happy to help walk you through it. So it looks like he sent some. Cool. Awesome. We'll be on the lookout for those. We'll be back on Saturday with another broadcast. Until then, have a great day, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.